Hey, it's Alex Ratcliffe from BoardGameCo, and today we are reviewing Galaxy Hunters, a worker placement game in this galactic, phenomenon sphere and whatnot, where you'll be taking both your giant mechs as well as your spaceships, putting them down different spots to achieve different objectives, slowly but surely powering up your mech, and then, well, taking over the galaxy, sort of. And I'm going to go into a brief how to play, a little bit of a few turns of structure and whatnot, and then from there I'll go into my review and final thoughts. So this is going to be a slightly harder run through than I usually do, specifically because of the fact that this game is a bit of a table hog, and we will come back to that in my final thoughts. So I'm going to go through the brief concept of the game, go through a few turns, and then move to the actual review, just so you understand how it plays. And to understand this best, really all you have to know is that it's a worker placement game. You're going to be taking your mechs and putting them down on planets, or your spaceships and putting them down on different zones and different planets to take the ability or the benefit that the planet provides, rinse, repeat again through 9 rounds of the game, and then call it a day. And that is basically it. That's all you really need to know. Everything else is completely, well, extra. And there are a lot of small details, don't get me wrong. So let's go through a few sample things. We'll just go through the basics. Again, please understand, this is not a full rules overview. If you're looking for a full rules overview, this is not it. This is just to give you a general feel of the playthrough. So to begin with, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my mech down on this planet. And actually, I'm not going to do this planet over here. Let's do this planet over here. And I'm going to take 3 of this resource up here. So I'm going to advance my tracker up there. Hopefully you can see it. Some of the stuff might be a little harder because of how much is off to the side of the table. This is just, well, it's a smaller table, so it's a little harder to get it in. From there, and I did that with my mech over there. Now, because I did it with my mech, my opponent's going to take a spaceship, and he's going to put it down over there on the 2 spot. You can see each spot has the number of players it accommodates. So in a 2-player game, 1 person can go to this planet plus a mech. In a 3-player game, 1 and 2 people can go to this planet plus a mech. So he went there, he copied my move, also taking 3 of that resource. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move my other ship. Let's see where I want to go over here. I don't have enough to buy anything though, but I do want some money. So I'm going to move over there, taking 4 money. Over here, that's the main monetary currency of the game. My opponent is going to head up over here to this planet up here and take 1 radiation. Radiation is bad for you. Sorry, wrong board. 1 radiation, which is bad for you, along with 1 of this resource over here, because they're trying to buy a specific good. And then let's see, over here we're going to move our ship. Let's see where we want to go over here. We want to go, we don't need any of our cubes equipped yet. Perhaps that one over there will take our radiation off. So I think we'll go over here. We'll go over here and we'll take 2 of this resource plus 2 money, heading up further on the track, which we don't have space for there because it's underneath the board, and 1 radiation. And finally, my opponent also wants money and heads over to this planet because it's currently occupied over there with my ship, but they can still go with my planet over there, taking 4 resources. From there, we'll go to the end of turn cleanup steps. There's a few different end of turn steps, including refilling different spots, taking your mechs off the board, and then potentially moving monsters depending on how things play out or which round you are up to. So we'll take those back, we'll move to the next track, and we'll continue from there. Now, I think I'm actually going to take a break from the run-through because the truth is, to get to where we need to go in this game would take multiple rounds, and I didn't set it up properly to, I guess, give a good starting point. So I'll just go into some basics throughout the game. One of the things you're going to be trying to do in this game is trying to be acquiring weapons. So you can see over here, this weapon requires 1 yellow resource, 1 orange resource, and 1 credit. And in exchange, when you use it against the monster, it's going to deal 3 damage and consume 1 red cube and 2 green cubes representing your ammo and your energy. And an example of how that plays out is if, let's say, we're fighting this monster over here, this monster is going to do 3 damage to us in an attack, and it has 3 health. And so our 3 damage weapon is enough to kill it, which is awesome. Unfortunately, we're going to take damage. I'm going to move this guy up a little bit. So what we're going to do in such a sequence of play where we had this weapon against this monster, we would lose 1 of our red cubes, and we would lose 2 of our green cubes. And in exchange, when the monster deals damage to us, we would lose 3 of our blue shield cubes, and we're left a little weaker for the next battle. Now, in exchange for that monster, when we flip it over, we're going to get the following resources, which is sometimes credits, sometimes specific monster tokens represent their remains or whatnot, resources, and then notoriety in the galaxy, fame, infamy, whatever you want to call that, in terms of our ability to rise up on the fame track. That is basically what the game is going to be. You're going to be moving around the board, collecting resources. Those resources will allow you to buy various upgrades. Those upgrades will range from various equipment in terms of the weapons you have. It'll also have endgame scoring things. You'll have a variety of endgame scoring abilities down there, and I have them off to different sides because of the table setup over here. You'll have a whole bunch of different abilities. So for instance, this spot over here might allow you to repair 4 energy every turn. Every turn you can flip this to get back 4 energy in your cubes, which is helpful. This one will do the same thing, but will allow you to repair 1 of each and then 1 wild. Again, helpful different upgrades. This one over here will allow you to store for additional energy. And you can see over here, there's all kinds of different augmentations that you can do throughout the game that will be slowly upgrading your mech. So this is very much one of those games where the first few rounds, and there's 9 rounds in the game, but the first few rounds will feel painfully slow. Once you hit over here a little bit later in the round, you'll unlock an extra ship each, so you will get that, very similar to Lords of Waterdeep. But then you continue going through the round, there is going to be a maintenance cost to those ships in these 2 rounds over here. And then throughout the game, as you get towards the end game, you're getting increasingly more powerful because you've slowly been upgrading your mechs the entire game. You've been giving them different abilities, better weapons to take out more monsters, better upgrades so that they can both store more cubes or refresh cubes. You'll have marketplace resources that will let you turn different resources into other resources. You'll have endgame scoring cards that will give you different endgame scoring. You'll have different pilot cards up there that'll give you different abilities. You'll have missions you're cashing in. The whole game, the core of the game is basically worker placement in which you go to a spot to do something. Different spots on the board will let you do different things. So for here, going to Planet Triaria is where you'll buy weapons or these upgrades, these gear upgrades. If you go to Planet Vars, you can refresh any 6 cubes on your board, on your player board, prepping you for the next battle. Throughout the game, these monsters are going to be slowly invading different planets. At the beginning, they start off in their own centralized planet over here, where you can go and attack them to get the rewards, but as the game progresses, they'll slowly but surely start invading other planets as monsters come out, and you'll have these evasions, and then you will no longer be able to go to that planet unless you fight the monster. There is a bit of a trick where you can spend 2 of your ships to go to a planet. One ship is effectively distracting the beast, while the other ship takes the benefit, but that's a high price to pay, when alternatively you can power up your mech and get yourself set to take out a monster. That can sometimes be easier than other times because you may not have a weapon. If you're fighting this creature over here, you may not have yet unlocked a weapon that can take him out. And if you really need to go to Planet Minion over here, then you may need to do that 2-ship distracting thing. There's a lot of different sequences in this game. Over here we have the notoriety track, or your fame track, which will unlock different spots you can go. You may notice these different spots on the board. Those are additional placements for your ships that will allow you to go to a planet that is already occupied, assuming you have achieved the correct fame level. So there's a whole bunch of interactions in this game, and a lot of things working together in different ways. And there's other scoring benefits in terms of the way you're going to be laying out your upgrades in your mech, because your upgrades on your mech will go into these various slots around your board. You'll have both mech upgrades as well as pilot upgrades over here. Lots of different sequences, lots of different things playing together to ultimately achieve, well, a game in which the first 4 rounds or so will feel painfully slow. But once you hit round 5, maybe round 6, you'll start to feel the pickup in pace, and then towards the end, you'll start getting a lot more done because of how powerful your mech is. And with that, let's go into my review. And so that was Galaxy Hunters. Not the typical run-through I usually try to do, but I didn't set it up well, and I realized it would take too many turns. So the first few turns are literally just building up toward a good weapon or whatnot, but then the game does escalate fairly quickly from there. Once you have your first weapon, your first upgrade, it gets easier and easier to do things. Once you get that additional ship, you get more and more stuff done, and so the game does accelerate pretty quickly after the first few cycles of the game, but I realized I didn't have time to go into that properly, so let's go into what I liked, what I didn't like, what I can see being a problem for others, and then of course my final thoughts. So to begin with, I like the fact that this is fairly easy to teach. If you've played Lords of Waterdeep, this is going to be incredibly easy to teach. It does follow very much that same sequencing. It does have a lot of similarities to Lords of Waterdeep. Completely different theme, completely different structures in terms of the update, but a lot of the core mechanisms will have some crossover there. But even if you haven't played Lords of Waterdeep, if you've played any worker placement game, you can get people up and running, because ultimately the game is, there's a whole bunch of planets here, you take a ship, you go on a planet, you get the thing. From there, the nuances are of course going to take more time, as well as what are these aliens, how do those play out. Lots of devil in the detail kind of moments here, but overall the core structure of this game, you can get people up and running pretty quickly because it's primarily worker placement. Put a spaceship down, take a thing. Secondly, what I like is I like the pilot mech combinations. This is something I didn't touch upon in my run through or whatnot, but in the pilots and mechs, you're going to have these combinations where every mech has 2 different slots that they upgrade for the pilot. So this mech upgrades these 2 pilot abilities, and this pilot comes with 4 potential abilities. And the combination of any pilot and mech will define which abilities unlock on that pilot. So every mech pilot combination will result in a different game, because each pilot does have their own unique competitive advantages that either make different planets more powerful, give you free upgrades or repairs. There's different options that the pilots will do, and the combination they're in, as well as the unique characteristics of what the mechs have for their various tokens, for various cubes, result in a slightly different arrangement in the game. And secondly, if you've watched my content in general, you know that I love upgrades in general. I love powers, I love upgrades, and this game is chock full of puzzles and upgrades. There's literally, and we'll get to this in the things I didn't like, but the table is literally stuffed, packed full of upgrades all over the place. Every single game is this little puzzle of how do I want to build my mech this game. I can upgrade, the weapons. I can get better weapons this game. I can get more cube resources holding. I can go for more of a market economy where I turn different resources into different resources and min-max my way towards getting other things from there. Every game is a puzzle of which upgrades, combined with your mech, combined with your pilot, combined with the current board state, combined with what players are doing, as well as the various pilot cards over there you can take, the pilot upgrades you can get. The game is just full, 100% full of upgrades. And that by far is my favorite thing of the game. The aspect of trying to build your mech with these different upgrades is, well, it's a lot of fun. It's a puzzle every single time. From there, we're going to get into what I didn't like, because really, usually I try to have more things in the categories of what I like, but ultimately in this game, it's basically a worker placement game. The thing that makes this stand out is the sheer amount of upgrades on the table being presented to you at any given point. In terms of what I didn't like, and this is a big one unfortunately, is this game, and I will note, I didn't say this in the beginning, this is a prototype review, and this is very impactful to the first thing I didn't like, really to the first two things I didn't like. The first one is that this game is very much a table hog. This game, between the board, and this is my small table, so don't hold that against it, but even on my larger game table upstairs, even where I play more of my larger games, this game was hard to fit everything down. It was hard to get the table down, to get the resource trackers, to get your mechs that are slowly going to be upgrading with all those fun upgrades. This game is a table hog to the point that it did impact my enjoyment of the game, constantly trying to reach across the board to get things in one of the larger games that I have played. Now, I do want to be very clear, I know that in the prototype copy I have, it is larger. I believe they have those aspects smaller, so it definitely impacted my own enjoyment, but it is a prototype issue. This is very much one of those cases why reviews of prototypes are a tough one, because this is a bigger version of the game than I believe you'll actually be getting. My understanding is that some of these elements, whether the board or the resource trackers or whatnot, are made a little bit smaller because they are aware of this issue. Which brings to number two that I didn't like, and this one I don't know if they're changing or not, but it is a prototype, so I do want to be very clear about it, which is the resource tracking system. I don't know how much you saw doing the run-through, but the resource tracking system over here, there are like 10 different resources all moving up along a little chart, and it's really one of the less elegant resource tracking systems I've seen. I believe they have gone through some iterations, so I don't know if this is the final iteration. I know that they've done different things in the game in terms of the way they handle the multiple resources, because there are a lot of different resources to manage, and to be clear, not all of them are resources. Some of them are radiation, which is bad, damage, debt. I believe there's 6 different resources plus 1 currency, and then 3 different negative effects and whatnot. And those are all tracked along this board. It was frankly a pain. I was not a fan of that system at all. It was, along with the table space aspect, it was one of the things that impacted my enjoyment of the experience, constantly moving tokens up and down on this track. It's possible, I don't know how to fix that, but it's possible that I feel there were too many resources that were necessary for this game, but I think that was probably a result of the different planets going on and how to make every planet different but necessary and balance the game. And lastly, what I didn't like, and again, potentially a prototype issue, is a lot of these tokens, a lot of these symbols over here are tiny. When you're looking across a giant board, and again, goes back to that as well, when you're looking across a giant board trying to figure out the different abilities or upgrades you can get, you're constantly squinting at little tiny symbols at the top of each upgrade to try to see what there's there. Now, for many of them, it's actually not that hard. For many, you're like, oh, that's money, no problem. That's the silver one, no problem. But specifically on some of the ones that the colors are a little too similar, perhaps pink or perhaps pink or orange, or yellow or orange more specifically, those ones can be a little annoying, especially if you spent a turn or two building up towards something and then you're like, oh, wait, that's not the resource I thought it was. That's unfortunate. Now, this is more of a problem, and I will note for colorblind friendly, every symbol does have its own design in it as well, so it's not purely a color issue, but still kind of the same thing. There's only so many different patterns you can have to a circle or a line when they're that small and across the table. Now, I will note again, potential prototype issue could be better in the final game, I don't know, as well as the fact that as you become familiar with the upgrades, that will become less of an issue, because while there are a lot in terms of your first play of the game, when you're jumping in and you've just been taught the game and you're looking at a lot of upgrades, even our second playthrough was already significantly faster in terms of getting a feel for, well, I know that weapon because I just played the last game and I want to get that weapon. It was that one more than the other two complaints were more an issue for my first game than the subsequent game. And worth noting, we only played 2 games. From there, we'll go into what I can see others not liking about this game, and that's this is a category of things that didn't bother me, but might bother you, and I'll go into why for each one. So first of all, don't expect a combat game. I know in my run through I talked about fighting monsters, and I know that I said those words, and those are just words. But if you walk into this expecting any form of combat game, it is not, and it might be a disappointment to you. This is a game that is ultimately a Euro. It's all about the cube management. Now, don't get me wrong, you are indeed fighting monsters, and you do indeed have giant mechs, but combat in this game ultimately comes down to trading in a few cubes, getting a few cubes back. It's all cube management. It's all manipulation of the cubes, just under the guise of a combat game. Now, it does work, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, and this is why it doesn't bother me at all, because I walked into this game knowing that already, but at the same time, if you are walking into this game expecting some sort of massive combat game where you're going to be rolling dice and having some sort of deterministic combat, well, I mean, you do have deterministic combat because it's a Euro game. You're trading cubes. Again, does not bother me for that particular one, but just understand what you're getting yourself into in this game. Secondly, and this is another one where I'll explain why it didn't bother me after, but all the upgrades are available from the start of the game. And there's a lot of upgrades. You are taught this game, you are plunged into it, and suddenly, like, again, 5-10 minutes of rules, not a lot, and then suddenly you have another 15-20 minutes of rules if you actually want to learn every single upgrade on the table. There are a lot of upgrades that are on the table from when you first jump into this game. Now, the reason that doesn't bother me is, in a way it did, but personally I would just house rule it differently the way next time I played it. Now, what I mean by that is what I would probably do, and it's not an official variant at all, this is literally just my own 2 cents, but what I would do if I was teaching this game to people is for each stack of different resources, for the different upgrades, what I would probably do is I would probably just reveal 3 from each stack and treat the game that way. And every time one's bought, reveal another. It totally changes the gameplay, and it might make it a worse game, but then the second play, you can go into having them all available. The problem is the amount of upgrades on the table and the amount of extra rules you have to learn is overwhelming and I think unnecessary for that first play. Now, many of these upgrades, once you teach someone one weapon, you can figure them all out. That's simple enough. And some of these upgrades will have that as well. Once I teach you, the other 2 I showed you in the run-through, once I teach you this one, you'll know this one as well. They're pretty simple. But especially when you get to the endgame scoring and the various resource trade-ins and whatnot, there are a lot of different things that you have to learn here that I think can possibly be overwhelming. Additionally, and this is where it's less of an issue for me, is some might just prefer to have them 3 at a time. Because if you have them all out from the very beginning every time you play, at a certain point this game can turn into a bit of a, a perfect optimization puzzle where you're like, well, I have to get this resource, and that resource. Kind of think of it like Kemet, if you've played Kemet, where all the upgrades are available at once. Now, in Kemet, I like it a lot. In this game, I was a little more on the fence in terms of whether I'd rather have them come out 3 at a time or 2 at a time or whatnot. Kemet has a tiered system in terms of the levels, which is why it's different, although this is becoming a bit of a digression into Kemet. And those are ultimately the things that I liked, didn't like, and what I can see being a problem for others. As far as my final thoughts, this game, Galaxy Hunters, is an interesting game. It is a game that it takes a familiar formula, which is worker placement. It gives me all these upgrades and abilities that normally I crave in games, but for me personally in this game, I will not be keeping Galaxy Hunters because at the end of the day, the various barriers and fiddliness of different things were a little bit too much in terms of the negative aspects of the game compared to the fun part about building out your mech. For me, I'd be intrigued to see how this would play out in terms of if it had significantly less table space and a better resource system. My issue with Galaxy Hunters is that while the core game is solid, the core game is totally fine, you put out your worker, you do your actions, you buy upgrades and abilities, and again, I love upgrades and abilities, it just felt like there were a little too many barriers to getting towards that pretty solid game for me to end up keeping Galaxy Hunters. If you are someone who likes optimizing your way to perfect, if you like Kemet, if you like that trying to build out your perfect tech tree and the cons don't seem to bother you or instinctively you don't feel those would be issues for you, then I do recommend checking Galaxy Hunters out. There is a lot of fun puzzle to be had towards min-maxing your way towards a better engine on your mech, and that is a fun system. For me, there's a little too many things getting in the way of that enjoyment for me to ultimately keep Galaxy Hunters. And that's basically it. That is Galaxy Hunters, my opinion of Galaxy Hunters. Solid game, a little too many fiddly things going on, but at the same time, and I want to emphasize this a lot, this is a prototype. So at the same time, some of those things that were problems for me may not be a problem in the final iteration, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo, and I hope you have a good one.